Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will begin as we usually do with public audience. Is there anyone who'd like to begin? Mr. Kalishman?
Thank you to allow me to start off public audience. There's been a lot going on in the last week and a half, 2 weeks. Mainly this marijuana fiasco that's going down on Hot Meadow Street. But before we go into that, I'm very proud receiving a letter from the President of the United States, and with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read it. The White House, Washington, July 3rd, Mr. Robert Kalishman, Simsbury, Connecticut. Dear Mr. Kalishman, thank you for sharing your story with me. I am saddened to learn of the difficult times you are experiencing. Our country enjoys the blessings of hard-earned peace and prosperity due to the selfless sacrifice of our men and women, amen, in uniform. Veterans like you deserve our total and unwavering support, your courage and strength and inspiration to us all. I extend our country's sincere gratitude for your service. You will remain in my thoughts and prayers. God bless you. Sincerely, Donald L. Trump. And if you'd like to take a look at it. The purpose of my attending this evening is I attended the zoning commission meeting that was held last week regarding CLNP, Mr. Greenberg, and the town zoning board. The first thing that came to my attention, and I should bring it to yours, is that it's against the federal government's law to use, abuse, or participate in the sales of a marijuana. In addition to that, if you happen to own a house, own property, lease property to an individual that's in the marijuana business, you're as liable as he is, and you're as much to blame as the person, that unethical person that stands on the corner and sells dime bags to our youngsters at the high school. The first thing that caught my attention was a young woman from Terriffill who left the meeting in tears. She had a very hard story to tell, and it was sad, but she left in tears. And my thinking, as I said before, is you're elected to help people like that. And what are we doing? We're destroying families, whether you want to realize it or not. And the important thing here, the thing that brought to my attention after the fact was, here we are passing a loaning ordinance. You people come up, you're telling us you want an ordinance on the water. We have an ordinance on people cutting their lawns. We have an ordinance on sidewalks being shoveled. And yet I looked at that property, and the property, they didn't cut the lawn. The people that bought the property from Greenberg didn't cut the lawn. They cut it after the fact. I went by there the next day after the meeting, and I said to myself, that's unusual. They cut the lawn. And lo and behold, the contaminated holes that look for the contamination, that site is contaminated. And the DEP has a letter of right. In other words, it's the same thing the Election Commission gets. It's called a letter of intent. In other words, the owner or whoever, CLMP, whoever, they sign a letter saying that they know it's contaminated, they'll view it, and if there's an increase in it, they'll report it. Well, when everybody started inquiring about the test holes, nobody knew who read it. And then I went there with the assumption that Mr. Greenberg, rightly so, was going to sell his property. Come to find out, through hocus pocus, through secrecy, he still owns it. He wasn't selling it, he was leasing it. So he's still participating. Why they tried to keep that fact from the public audience, I have no knowledge. But I do know,
5 minutes.
okay, I do know that one of the commissioners, Mr. Elliott, was vehemently opposed to the marijuana, and he voted against it. And if you check into them, you'll find that those things, they still don't know who's monitoring that or who's reporting it.
Thank you. John.
Joan Coe, 26 Whitcomb Drive. I would like to report that Jamie Rabbit, Town Planner and Director of Community Development, has resigned his position before it is alleged that he would have been fired. There were many reimbursements that appeared to have been authorized, and there was a Title VII complaint filed against him for job discrimination. I have once again filed a Freedom of Information complaint to review all of his reimbursements from April 2018 to the present, and all the payments made to him prior to his departure. Municipal employees should be mindful that employees receiving tax dollars for reimbursement and payments should be reviewed for compliance. As a result of my review of his expenditures, it was noted that there is no policy in place for purchases with tax-free credit. Tax-free credit cards. Since municipalities are tax-exempt, purchases should not be taxed. Jamie Rabbit was reimbursed for purchases with town funds for over $600 for books relating to planning from Amazon that remains in his office. These books should be given to the library as a resource for people interested in town planning. The Hartford Courant recently had a story about Ensign Bickford Industries Incorporated moving 20 administrative jobs to Denver. EB Industry leases the land from Dino Nobel. Was the town aware of their departure, and will there be more moves in the future? Recently, the Zoning Commission had a public hearing on the Curaleaf move to the Eversource building at 34 Hop Meadow Street. The hearing was closed, although there were several people giving testimony against the move and issues about the site being contaminated. However, the Zoning Commission closed the hearing, although they could have extended the hearing for more testimony. It appeared that this was a done deal before the hearing began. According to a title search on the property, 34 Hop Meadow Street was owned by American Sumatra Tobacco Corporation and was sold to Hartford Electric Light, then sold to Mark Greenberg Infinity for LLC. There have been historic contamination of the land from tobacco fields and electric light companies, and yet there was very little discussion of contamination and no testimony from the DEP where the property is considered a contaminated site. In the land records, volume 562, page 0893, number 25, Environmental Matters describes in length the requirements for testing the site for contamination and requirement for filing findings. Has this been done? Are the people at the apartments at Aspen Green in danger of living on a contaminated site? Testimony at the hearing stated that Curaleaf is a large national organization and a multi-million-dollar operation. Once the infused cookies, vapes, oils, etc. with marijuana, children will eventually ingest these products. Friends and family will have access to these mind-altering drugs. This will lead to mental health crisis with many unintended consequences. The Zoning Commission did not consider whether the zone change was a benefit to the community when it will have operations on a large-scale residential neighborhood. Why didn't the Board of Selectmen give testimony on on this major marijuana operation? What was the position of community for care? Prior to July 4th, Stephen Antonio was told by the fire marshal that he had to get a permit for fireworks he will be using at his home on July 4th. However, he decided to ignite his fireworks, many of which were illegal, although he was forewarned. Both the fire marshal and the Simsbury police were called when the fireworks started and confiscated 5 ordinances that were turned over to the fire marshal for destruction. Steve Antonio was arrested for illegal fireworks, case number 19501, and is scheduled to appear in Enfield Court on July 18, 2018. Recently, the Simsbury Police Department was dispatched to a person who had grown up in Simsbury who had overdosed on drugs. They could not resuscitate him. I have asked the Simsbury Police to investigate who supplied the drugs to this person and arrest him. Several towns have investigated dealers who supply illegal drugs to their residents and arrest them. Several of the dealers are serving many years in prison. The Simsbury Police should use all their available tools to find this person and prosecute him. The Board of Selectmen has proposed a policy on carry-out garbage at town parks. However, the Simsbury Meadows Performing Arts Council recently had a BYOB concert and left the garbage in overloaded garbage containers with garbage strewn all over the area. Why is the Simsbury PAC exempt from the carry-out trash policy? I have filed a complaint with the zoning compliance official alleging that 33 Canal Street is an R15 zone, is violating the zoning regulations by having a doctor's office in the house without the owner as a resident of the home. The second floor has a rental apartment. This is a business, not a residence. All of my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch, Twitter at Joan Co, newsfeed on Facebook, and Simsbury Forum Topics. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joan. Anybody else like to speak tonight? Susan?
Good evening, Susan Messino, 41 Madison Lane. It's the start of fair season in Connecticut, and the first fair of the season is in North Stonington this weekend. Connecticut's fortunate, we have about 50 fairs around the state. If you can see this, but there's dots all over the map. And I brought in a little fair brochure. They send us about a zillion of them to the Grange, so I figure I might as well pass them out. And I left a stack on the table if anyone else wants some, and I'll probably leave a stack on the front desk if that's okay, which I think it is, and I'm probably going to do it, and that's it. Our fair, the Simsbury Grange Fair, is on September 15th this year. We host the only certified agricultural fair in the Farmington Valley, and it's been it was lapsed for a couple of years, but we've been trying to build it up over the past few years. So we have hay rides, live music, kids games, we have food, we have contests. If you bake, knit, pickle, do artwork, grow vegetables, grow fruits, or any of those home arts kinds of things, you can enter our contest. So it's kind of like a mini Big E. We have very small cash prizes, but the ribbons are fabulous if you win in one of those contests. And all of those categories are also open to children, and all the information is on our website, simsburygrange.org. I'm also here to announce a new partnership between the Grange and the Historical Society to do a couple of concerts we're calling them Concerts on the Green. You may know that other towns have some, Bloomfield does, Canton has, I don't know, what other towns have kind of concerts on the green. But we check to make sure it doesn't conflict with anything at the PAC or any other major events. My goal is to have live music, bring in good musicians, have it be kind of donation-based, have it at a time when families and everyone can come. So the first concert is going to be on Saturday, August 4th, and it will feature the Roberto Morbioli Band. He is currently touring the U.S. and Europe, and he's a very well-known blues guitarist from Italy. It will be from 5 to 7. And then the second concert that we're having is actually on September 15th, which is the same day as our fair. So that's going to be a little bit of a busy day for me. But think about this, you can go straight to the fair and then straight, relax on the green, bring blankets, picnics, whatever you want to do. And we are interested in volunteers or sponsorships for the concert. We're kind of just putting it together somehow this year, but if anyone wants to help in any way with labor, money, that would be super. We hope to continue it in the future. It's a beautiful space we have downtown, and I think it would cost very little to have a really nice event. So that's it.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you very much.
If you send me the information about the concerts, that's something I could include in my report.
Oh, your report. Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you
okay,
very much.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak tonight? Okay. Moving on then to my first selectman's report and then the town manager report. I'm just going to be hitting on a few items, and then there's a slightly more extensive version that we'll be emailing out. Anybody who wants to subscribe to either the first selectman or town manager's report can do so on our website, and we also have the ability to sign up for meeting minutes and anything else that you, any other town correspondence that you would want to get regularly. First item is improved cell phone service. So the town is working with Verizon to improve cell phone service in parts of town where service has historically lagged. Verizon's installing a series of 5 boosters. 2 boosters have already been installed and are active near Westminster School and Simsbury Commons. Additional boosters are planned near the Weetog Post Office, the high school, and Route 10 near Plank Hill Road. Pending regulatory approval, installation of those remaining 3 is expected to take place over the next 6 months. Later this year, FEMA will be initiating the process of updating its flood insurance rate maps. This project will involve restudy of areas of flood hazards within the Farmington River watershed. There will be a public input portion, so public meetings are yet to be scheduled, but will be a component of this process, and I'll be sure to share those details when they become available. The Simsbury Public Library encourages you to sign up for its summer reading program. It's not too late, and it's not just for kids. Adults and teens are also encouraged to sign up. Every time you visit the library, you'll be entered to win one of numerous prizes. Also, every week, they'll be giving away vouchers for free stuff like yard goat tickets and ice cream, and the summer reading program runs through the middle of August. Eno Hall renovations began last week to improve the kitchen, construct additional storage space, and improve the bathrooms. During construction, the lower level of Eno is closed. Parking near the rear of the building will be limited. The elevator and the existing handicapped accessible ramp on the north side of the building will remain open during construction. The first and second floors of Eno will be open through the first floor entrance of the building. Anybody who has any questions about accessibility can reach out to the Department of Community and Social Services. And that's what I've got. Maria?
Great, thank you. 2 quick items under Board of Selectmen business. The executive session we had scheduled this evening for Deepwater Wind is not needed, so we will not need to hold that. Second, today my office sent an email with possible dates. Again, we were looking at Saturdays and perhaps late August or September to hold the goal-setting session for this group. When you have a moment, if you could please respond to that doodle poll so we can see if we can find a Saturday that works for everyone to participate. Under departmental news and notes, 2 items from the town manager's office. We received notice from our liability automobile property insurance carrier, it's KERMA, they are also our workers' comp insurance carrier, that we will be receiving a members' equity distribution check. The total amount for the town and Board of Ed is just under $50,000. So that is in part due to our very good claims experience over the past year, as well as KERMA's overall financial health. So I really want to thank all of my staff who in some way, shape, or form work on risk management, Melissa, Eric Gomes, and a number of our department heads such as Tom Roy and the Public Works team, again, have worked really hard, I think, to keep our claims experience low and in good shape. So thank you.
We getting a big check?
I don't know if we're going to get one of the fancy photo op ones or not, or just the actual check.
Big check.
Also from the town manager's office, I have initiated a recruitment for our planning and community development director position. The position is currently posted, and we are accepting application materials through the end of this month on July 30th. We're anticipating holding the first round interviews in the middle of August. Mike Payne has agreed to assist with those first round interviews, as well as the chairs of our elected land use bodies. And I've also asked our town engineer, Jeff Shea, to serve on that internal panel as well. As we've done with our other department heads recently for the external panel, we'll also be looking to put together a panel of external professionals and have the first round consist of an interview with both the internal and external panels. For special events, two of note, we have our 17th annual family night, and that's going to be on Tuesday, July 17th at Simsbury Farms from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. There will be a lot of great activities for families there. Dinner will be provided at a cost of $2 per person, and information regarding that event is provided on our website. And lastly, we have a Veterans Resource event scheduled for Wednesday, July 18th. That will be from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at Ena Memorial Hall. We'll have a number of veterans-affiliated organizations and community resources, again, that are available to veterans and their families. And so we encourage folks to participate in that event. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you, Maureen. Moving on to Selectmen action, item A is proposed approval of change in scope for the generator infrastructure project. So I will ask Tom Roy to give some history on this issue. But it's the recommendation of town staff to install permanent generators at the library and Eno.
It all started back in 2011 when it started. And from that point forward, I think we've been working really hard on making sure that our infrastructure is as resilient as it possibly can be. I mean, I think we've all seen the worst of what we could reasonably expect, and I think just recently, big portions of Connecticut that were hit so heavily by the May 15th tornadoes and the devastation associated with that and the need for what we're doing. This was the final project where what we were doing over the course of fiscal 16 and 17 was purchasing a portable generator asset that would be used by both the town, and it was going to be shared with the WPCA. That generator asset has the ability to be stationed here during a storm event, so that in the event of our permanent generator here failing, we then have a backup to our backup. Sadly, during the Tropical Storm Irene, as everybody was in the EOC, our permanent generator, the voltage regulator started to fail, the lights started to flicker, and here it was, the core town staff was about to have to abandon our EOC because of that. So it kind of highlighted the need to be able to have that additional reassurance for this building. And with that asset, we saw the ability to protect Eno and the library from the potential of pipes freezing or other negative consequences associated with a long duration power outage. As we started to move forward with the project, we first off got very, very favorable pricing on the portable generator asset itself. We then came in significantly under our estimated budget for the electrical work for the rather unique connection in order to have a permanent generator and a backup generator at this facility. And in looking at that, we actually have enough money within the allocated two projects to put permanent generators at both the library and at Eno within the funds allocated. And it's simply a matter of changing the language to allow us to install essentially a better product for the same dollar values that were already allocated.
What questions do people have? Mike?
Tom, will these new permanent generators have the ability to plug in our portable generator also? If the need comes up where that generator fails, much like you did in Town Hall here?
We are not setting it up with that level of redundancy for those
Okay.
two facilities. With it being on the Route 10 corridor, we do have a couple of advantages within this area. This is one of the first priorities based upon the location of this building in the fire district for power restoration within town. We're also fed essentially from two different substations now, which is a major improvement to our reliability that we've seen since that 2011 storm. And we wouldn't be able to make that connection, especially with Eno. The generator, we believe, is going to end up going on the roof so that it would be out of sight. This would be next to where we have currently one of the large air handling units. So we believe at this point that structurally the roof has already been designed for that load.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Any other questions?
Are these generators powerful enough to support air conditioning if we have a summer outage and cooling centers need to be available?
These generators right now, I believe at the library, they are going to be set up for that. That's one of the benefits that we're looking at. So off the top of my head, I'm going to tell you that they are, and that's currently our goal. I would say as we're going through the project, if there was any additional expenses, that would be one of the things that we would have to look at, whether that would drop out. But I believe currently we have enough contingency funds that that's not going to be a problem.
Can you just help me understand why enough money was left over to allow for the change in scope?
Okay, a couple of things. The first thing is the portable generator asset. We had looked at some of our local vendors and what they could supply this for. A large portable generator this size is not necessarily extremely common within Connecticut, especially with some of the specifications we were looking at. Through a GSA contract, government service contract, we got a significant pricing break, and if you can think on a national level, this is something that's far more common. And it was something that within our procurement, when we had looked with our existing vendors that were helping us with the electrical side of things, they had given us a range of what to expect. Tony Piazza has actually been managing this project from the treatment plant, and he had some experience and did some digging and got us some very favorable pricing. And then when it came to the electrical connection here at this facility, it is rather unique to have a permanent generator with an automatic transfer switch so that it turns on automatically, and then to also have a secondary backup generator. The original configuration was very expensive, and we ended up working with a different engineering company to help find a more economical way to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions, or? Okay. Would someone mind reading the resolution then into the record?
I'll do it.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl.
Resolved, it is hereby determined that the scope of the project to provide generator infrastructure at Eno Memorial Hall, Simsbury Public Library, and Town Hall approved by the Town of Simsbury as part of the 2015, 2016, and 2016-2017 capital improvement plans be modified to include the purchase and installation of permanent generators at both Eno Memorial Hall and Simsbury Public Library, and other expenses related to the project as modified.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Next is the proposed revisions to the carry-in, carry-out policy.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay. In July of last year, a carry-in, carry-out policy went into effect in our town parks, which means in most cases, trash cans are not available, so anything that people carry in needs to be carried out. The policy was adopted for a number of reasons, among them environmental benefits, saving staff time, and preventing illegal dumping. The feedback that we've gotten from town staff and the Culture, Parks, and Rec Commission is that the policy overall is working well. However, myself, I know other members of this board and the town manager's office have also gotten feedback from the public that there's one place where this policy may not be working as well, and that's Rotary Park. And the complaints, to be specific, is that there's litter on the ground. It's my recommendation that we revise the carry-in, carry-out policy to include trash cans at Rotary Park. And, I don't make the recommendation lightly, and it's frustrating to me, frankly, that some people would rather litter than take the garbage out. But I also think that, we have an interest in ensuring that our most heavily used park is as clean as possible, and I think that this is a way to accomplish that. So with that, I want to see if there was other discussion. Chris?
For me, Eric, I think that's very well stated all the way around, and I would support having the receptacles at Rotary Park, so.
Cheryl?
I maintain my initial objections to supporting, sort of us caving in to members of the public who don't feel it's their responsibility to remove their own garbage. When I looked at this, I thought perhaps we could compromise and save some staff time by having the garbage cans there only on heavily used season, like, maybe spring and summer. It is not my desire to create more work, however, for public works staff that might have to remove, put them back, remove, put them back. So I'm a little torn on that. I would welcome any guidance anybody has on whether that would be feasible. But my initial reaction is to oppose that, putting the garbage cans back for all the reasons that we took them away in the first place. I think once you do that, we're going to see, again, people dumping more garbage and attracting pests and wildlife and insects and all sorts of things that we didn't want in the first place, particularly around a playground. So that's my feeling on that.
Yeah. And Sean?
I mean, this is particularly troubling because again, I'll end up supporting this, but we should monitor it because when the trash cans were down there, it was mostly this on the ground down there, even with trash cans and food items. So people that are complaining about it they seem to be items that are common with those that are visiting it. It's chip bags and kids' food items, Starbucks cups, etc. So I've played down the playground with my daughter. Free carry in, carry out, and post, and it's the same. So we need to make sure that the residents of this community are doing something about it as well. This is our asset. People shouldn't be throwing, their $6 latte cups on the ground. That's not what's consistent with this community. So if this works, so be it. But if this doesn't work, we need to talk about other action. Do we enforce a litter ordinance or otherwise? We love ordinances here, so. Because it's unacceptable that there continues to be trash in this playground, so.
Yeah, I agree. It is going to need to be monitored if we move in this direction, and also understanding what's the right frequency to empty the cans, especially in the summer months during heavier usage.
But, I'm usually the curmudgeon up here, but this is ridiculous that the Board of Selectmen, again, has to talk about our residents throwing trash on the ground in our own town.
Right.
This
I
is
agree.
our residents. This is not people coming in from anywhere else. So we can fix this problem ourselves really easily. This is ridiculous that this board is talking about this again.
I also have a question, and I think Tom Roy isn't here anymore, but I think he brought it up, that if we put trash receptacles back at this facility, we would also have to put a recycling bin.
That's correct.
And that just
Yeah.
adds to the layer of work involved for staff to, it's another thing they would have to deal with. I wish he was here to answer that, because I'm pretty sure he said that we would have to put a recycling bin there also.
Is that a question you know the answer to, Maria?
That is correct. We would need to have a recycling
So we
bin
have
as
to have
well.
a trash barrel and a recycling
Correct.
barrel.
That's correct.
And what happens to the recycling material? They're gonna pick it up and then
It would get hauled, right?
go back to the
Rubbish.
transfer station, or?
I'm not sure the logistics of where it actually ends up, if it goes to the transfer station first, or if it just goes directly with the vendor that's hauling it, but the recyclable materials would be hauled away, correct?
Where does Culture Parks and Rec usually put the trash when they're?
Come on now, spend 2 weeks now.
You don't always get to pick it up yourself? That's part of your job?
Yeah. I hope your ankle feels better, because that's,
That's one of the things we left out of your interview.
I know trash goes through a dumpster right now, I don't know what recycling.
Where it gets hauled to?
All the trash recyclables will be going to Mira in Hartford. Materials recovery under our flow control contract.
But so we're not adding an additional, we already have that pickup built into other facilities in town. We're not adding, this is a new stop.
I'm coming in a little late. When you say pickup,
Tom, can I ask you to just go up to the mic for SCTV purposes?
So, Tom, we're talking about the potential revision to the policy to include a trash receptacle at Rotary Park.
Yep.
And we're learning that with reintroduction of trash receptacle, to put a recycling bin as well. So my question around that was, we are already doing recycling runs essentially in town, right? So we're not adding a new vendor for that, or if we put it down.
okay, I think we need to, when you say we are doing recycling runs, the town staff, I don't believe anybody from Culture, Parks and Rec, Public Works, we don't do trash pickup. We hire vendors to do all of that
Yes.
for us. One of our 2 primary vendors would be,
So they're already contracted to do that for other spots in town. We're
That
not
is correct.
adding another service onto a contract that's existing.
Just
So it's another stop.
It would be no different than
Thank you.
one more
End
resident on a
conversation.
street.
Thank you.
That's all, that's what I wanted to know, is if we already were doing that.
Okay.
So help me out then, why does the submission say that staff time of 10 to 15 hours to remove the rubbish is there?
That's for all of the parks in aggregate. So the time saved for all the parks in aggregate is about 10 to 15 hours a week. This would just be adding back one site.
But if we have a vendor picking it up.
Correct. That we'll still have,
I understand how we're saving staff time if we've always had a vendor doing this.
My understanding, Tom, you might know this from your past history, is if you had barrels out in the park, all waste or paints, they're not going to drive their trucks out into our parks to pick up those barrels. In those cases, you would be driving a truck out there with a town staff member who would put the trash into a town truck, bring it to the dumpster, and then it would be collected from the dumpster. Where I believe what I saw in the submission tonight is you're looking at a tipper barrel no different than you would have at your residential home, placed at Rotary Park in a location that could be accessed by one of the trucks from either Payne's or All Waste or any other vendors that would do the collection.
Gotcha.
So no staff time.
Oh, okay. But I thought in our submission, you have a staff allowance in there. Wasn't it 1,600?
right, so this,
Oh, I'm sorry.
under financial impact, this was an estimate that Tom had for, Tom Tversky had for if we were to use the vendor to do what Tom Roy had just described.
An additional $1,965 per year
Right, was our estimate,
to add
correct?
the stop with trash and recycling?
Yeah, I think that might be high.
That number, I was looking at another invoice, that we were talking beforehand, that may have been a 6-month number versus a 1-month number. The 165.
The number should be very similar to what you're paying at home, which
Yeah.
would be about
Is that-
$175 for
yeah.
6 months.
We're not paying $2,000.
That's what I thought that was a big number for one trash
This is
pickup.
government, it always costs more.
Oh,
We talked about that right before the meeting, so I think the number would be closer to 175 for every 6 months.
Well, so do we, seeing as we've learned 2 new things tonight, which is we have to get a, I cannot stand I'm continuing this conversation. And then we have to, so we have to add a recycling bin in, and we potentially have a faulty estimated cost in here. Do we now move this down to the next meeting to get accurate information?
No, I mean, it's less cost. It's not
Care-
going up.
No, then we have to talk about it again.
I don't want to talk about it again.
For formality reasons. We can just get this over with tonight then.
I mean, it's going down in cost. If it was going up,
Right.
Right.
tripling, quadrupling, that's a different story. We're getting a better deal. Again, all I care about is whether the park's clean or not. And again, the residents in this community take ownership for that park and not trash it. So if this solves that problem, let's try it.
With the option to revise the revision next year.
We always have the option to revise.
Yeah.
And I want to report back on how the revised policy is working, too.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not working, I mean, one of us will know it. We're all down there.
We've already gotten the phone calls and emails, so.
Yeah.
We're going to know about it one way or the other.
Were you going to add something, Maria?
Sure, I was going to add, as we were researching this topic a bit more, we realized that last year when this policy was adopted, it was not actually reduced to writing in a policy document format. So we did have to do a bit of work in terms of going back and reading through what I would characterize as legislative intent, as well as old cover memos, also talking with staff to understand what the practice had been. So again, this was, I think, a good opportunity for us to actually document what the policy is, how it's being implemented, the couple of exceptions that are in place. So in that regard, I think that this is actually a very, very good opportunity for us to make sure that we're documenting the policy and procedures correctly. So regardless of whether or not the board decides to move forward with this new exception, I would encourage us to still take action on the policy document itself for the other content that's in the policy document.
But you put the Rotary Park exception in the policy.
Right, it's hard to.
So if you vote for the policy, but you are not in favor of putting them back at Rotary Park, then what do
We
you?
could simply move to remove that piece. Instead of saying as presented, we could say, to modify to not include, I think it was exception C. But I did
I
just
have
want
a
to point
feeling
out that
I'm
we
going
did
to be
not
in
have.
minority position here, but that's, I
Yeah,
am
I
in-
understand.
I am in favor of the carry in, carry out policy. I am not in favor of making an exception for Rotary Park.
Yeah. Well, you already approved the policy. last year.
We did, but she's asking us to approve a written policy again.
Revision. I mean, it says it's a revision.
It would be a revision, right? It was a very brief motion that the board had made. It was essentially a very brief motion saying that we adopt a carry and carry out policy, but all the rest wasn't there. So I thought, again, this was just a good opportunity to sort of codify what was the content in the cover memos as well as the legislative intent that was discussed.
I'm still at a loss as where that leaves me.
Eric, I actually think this represents a really wise balance. I mean, carry in, carry out has been a policy with, larger national parks for people who are environmentally conscious for many, many years. And what we're doing is we're applying it to our local parks. And it seems to work really well. I went again this weekend into Curtis Park. Looks really good. I went up to Terriffill. Looks really good. I went, a couple weeks ago into a couple other parks. Everything looks fairly good.
It does.
But where you have a couple of parks with a high degree of activity that are, playground being one, and the one exception being the Rotary Park, it is not necessarily the original intent of the type of park that you would necessarily use, carry in, carry out. It's not working for people. They're showing up, and you make a very valid point. Even with a can, the people who are leaving their coffee cups on the ground, the kids that are leaving their stuff on the ground, they're going to continue to leave it on the ground. But you know what? The people who show up, who see that, they'll pick it up, they'll throw it out, and they'll be happy. As I said before, I travel around quite a bit. When you go into a park in a city and you see garbage, the perception is the city is not really managing itself well. And that's the feedback that we're getting from people. So it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not really violating our commitment to carry in, carry out. We can revise this down the road. We can continue to reinforce that people should throw stuff out. To me, it's a really nice, wise balance between preserving what's working, but recognizing where it's not. So I'm very supportive of doing this.
Thank you. Is there a motion effective July 9th, 2018, to revise the carry and carry out policy as presented?
So move.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so this passes 4-1. Thank you for the discussion. Can someone let Mike know that he's invited back?
And I'm totally in favor of carry in, carry out.
I know. I understand that.
It's a whole different ballgame from that.
Moving on to item C, tax refund requests. Is there a motion effective July 9th, 2018, to approve the presented tax refunds in the amount of $313.36 and to authorize Town Manager Maria Capriola to execute the tax refunds?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Item D, we return to the proposed tax sale policy. It's the recommendation of our tax collector that the town establish a policy for conducting tax sales when businesses or people are delinquent on their taxes. At our last meeting, the board expressed general support for a tax sale policy with some reservations that the threshold should be high enough so that we're not going after people's properties for relatively small sums of money. And tonight, we're asked to consider two things. One is the policy itself, and then the other, if we're supportive of a policy, is hiring legal counsel to help, manage the process. So with that, Colleen or Maria, could I ask you to summarize what the policy would do?
Sure, I can start and have Colleen assist. So based on the feedback at the last meeting, we took a look at the thresholds and are recommending increases to the thresholds. For back taxes on properties, we were saying that we would increase that threshold from 20 to 25,000. For that basis, when we were looking at 3 years worth of taxes on a median valued single family home, we thought, okay, $25,000 is approximately, what you would be looking at for 3 years worth of back taxes. So we, again, are recommending an increase there. Also, based on the conversation around sewer assessment, we are recommending the threshold be 5 years as opposed to 3 years. Currently, we do not actually have any properties with sewer assessments 5 years in arrears. So under the current policy, under the current proposed policy, if we were to move forward. There would be approximately 26 properties that would be affected if we were to move forward with tax sale. So what we've also done is just taken those standards and again reduced it to a policy. So it would be very clear to everyone in terms of which circumstances we would proceed with the tax sale. And then what we would also do after the tax collector has gone through the procedures, we would meet with myself, the revenue collector, as well as our finance director, confer, and if there were properties that we recommended advancing to tax sale, we would bring that to you in terms of recommending that we move forward with the tax sale if properties met that criteria. Whether we did that once a year, once every 2 years, just as often as was appropriate.
Colleen, I apologize. Would you mind my stepping up to the mic for SCTV purposes? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's most towns, some towns do it every year, but a lot of towns do them every other year. And one of the things that I wanted to clarify last time when we talked about the sewer use and we had the 3 years, and the ones that were more than 3 years, they're current on their real estate taxes because they're escrowed. The tax bill goes to the escrow company, the sewer bill goes to the homeowner. And I had been in contact with all of those banks regarding those, 3 properties that we had. Well, it turned out 3 by the time we came to the meeting. They will not pay the taxes until they have a tax sale date. Their real estate is not delinquent because they're paying the real estate. They know we're first lien holder. Some of the ones that fall in the tax sale, I think out of those properties, there are 3 that also their sewer use is included, and it's over the 25,000. So it's, the reason why I had the 3 years was in there is because, like I said, the banks will not pay until they actually have a foreclosure date or a tax sale date. So obviously, those properties are already in jeopardy with the banks, and the banks won't pay the town until they actually have a sale date. So that was the only reason why I had the 3 years on there. So, I mean, I know it looks like we're doing a tax sale. I can bet you lunch that those would never even make it. As soon as they get the first letter saying there's going to be a tax sale, we would probably get a check within that month.
Any other questions for Colleen? I'm very supportive of the concept of a tax sale policy because it ensures that we're treating everybody equitably. I think where that threshold is a very valid discussion. I wanted to see where the board's head is at in terms of are we prepared to approve this policy tonight? Do we have any concerns about these levels? I'll say I thought it was interesting that of the 26 properties that would be impacted by this policy, more than half of them are vacant.
Right, right.
And do they all have mortgages?
No, that's why they're on the tax sale. There are the ones that aren't, and it's hard to, I mean, I've looked at them, there's probably, not on the vacant ones.
Right.
But on the other ones, there maybe will be, I know, 3 or 4 that will get paid right away, because as soon as the bank gets their letter, they're gonna pay us. And a couple of them are pretty large.
So just so I understand the process, we got to pay an attorney $5,000 to send a letter when we're going to get paid?
It doesn't cost the town.
File an open or demand letter, process full pay?
That gets all written in the tax sale. The town doesn't, there's no cost to the town. So whether the bank pays it, whatever the fees are, they're included in.
So we get our full amount?
We get our full amount.
Okay.
Yeah, we get our full amount. The only chance that would be if we had a property and nobody bid on it, and we decide that we don't want it either, so we can pull it out of the tax sale. It'll still be on the tax roll, and whatever work the attorney has done to that point, no different than what's happening right now with some of the accounts that we've had in foreclosure, that we've been paying for.
Quick question, the submission here, I don't know who this question is for. Option C, this is relative to the promotion of a legal consideration. says option direct staff to issue RFQ for special legal counsel to assist with tax sales. Is that at the point of the potential sale, or is that?
Sure, I can tackle that question. So option C would be that if you all would like to go through an RFQ process, we would do that in advance of conducting a tax sale. And what would be helpful, in addition to key staff members, I think because the board is ultimately the appointing authority for special counsel, to have at least one board member participate in interviews of potential firms, and then sort of work through an RFQ process and make a recommendation for appointment of special counsel. So that's how option C would work if that was a direction that you wanted
So
to
if I
take.
read this right, if A and B is tonight, where we would be, if it was A or B, tonight, we're appointing either Pullman and Conley or Updike. That's the decision we're making tonight. And then C,
Chris, if I may, I'm really looking at this as, let's start with approving the policy if we're so inclined to.
this is first on the submission, so, excuse me.
No, I think the first would be a motion to approve the tax sale policy as presented. And then, if we do approve it, I think then the question is, how do we go about identifying counsel? That's at least the way I'm looking at it.
Well, if we're going to approve a policy, then we have to appoint a counsel.
Sure.
Yeah.
On number 1, a real estate delinquency on a single parcel is at least 3 grand lists late, or $25,000, whichever is first? Or
Right.
do you mean whichever is greater, or, I mean, there are some properties where 25,000 would be 2 years of property taxes.
Absolutely.
So, in
Right,
fact,
could
quite
be
a
1
few.
year.
Or
Right.
1 year.
Right,
So,
whichever.
Is first.
Whichever is first,
whichever is first.
yeah.
But, so there's a possibility that a house with a large tax bill is subject to this after 1 year.
Some towns foreclose after the first year. That's
No,
their
I understand
that's
that,
their
I'm just for
policy, yeah.
policy purposes. that
There's only
we're-
one on that list that's 2 years, but they're way over the amount. The rest are more than 3. And the one that's just 2 is a commercial, it's not a house. Right. Commercial.
You gotta be $1.2 million,
Yeah.
Right.
$1.3 million to make
Well,
it
that-
to 25,000.
I mean, it's really a concept of whether it's the amount you're concerned about or the time frame for payment.
Well, it's kind of both,
Regardless
because
of
when
the
you get to a
amount.
certain amount, that's a lot
Right.
of money, and it's that much harder for people to try to catch up.
Absolutely. I'm just kind of exploring that as a policy question.
Yeah.
You know, are we, for that person, that's going to be 1 year in arrears?
Yeah, I guess my first thought is I wouldn't be opposed to making it an amount of time as opposed, so you're proposing it would be based on time rather than dollars?
I think you have to.
Or both. I would think, my inclination is to make it 2 grand lists late and lower the amount of the dollar figure to like $15,000. My concern is more that they've already not paid you. The bill is building. It's now tougher for them. I'd be shocked if you're the only person they owe money to. So,
That will change that will change the amount and the numbers that will be on there.
Yeah.
If you go 2 and you go,
no, that's
Yeah.
my concern, and
No.
if I don't put it out there, then nobody else knows.
yeah, no, that's a very, very valid point. You know, and you can, I mean, some towns, they don't really have a policy. They steer away from a policy because it depends on, like, if they do it every year or every other year, you know, what's in it. So they just basically, they don't call it a policy. The procedure that was, you know, appointed or presented July 9th, you know, this is what they're doing for the tax sale this year. So,
The same way you would
Right, and
present
this
a
is the-
tax refund, you would present.
right,
These are the
so
tax
for
sales.
doing it for the first time with everything, when we tried it before, and we just did a couple of parcels that were vacant, we didn't set any policy, you know, or anything, we just picked which ones, that, because we knew they were vacant. So for doing it for the first time, including everything, which it should be, that's the only reason why we came up with the 3 years and that amount, because it is the first time. I believe, once people know that we are going to be doing this, you won't see it like it has been. Right now, there hasn't been anything. So there hasn't been any reason to pay. Nothing happens.
Chris, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I could be okay with $2,000 lists. I'd prefer to keep the 25,000 as opposed to reduce it, in part because of the concern that Cheryl raises, is we would have a reasonably good population of houses that could potentially have an issue first year, and I don't think we want to be overly
That's what I was-
aggressive with that reality, so
That's my concern.
25,000 is more comfortable for me than reducing it.
So if you're saying 2 years, though, or 25, so that would be a lot more that would fall into the 2 years, and they would be under that 25.
Sure. I'm okay with the 3-year, but if there was a proposal to reduce it to the 2-year, I'm comfortable with that as well, so.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we have a lot of houses that are gonna fall into that category, and,
If you take the 2 years.
right.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm fine leaving it as it is.
Okay, I want to summarize what I'm hearing. Are we saying that we would rather leave it at the higher threshold of 3 years and 25,000?
I believe that's what we came back to.
Yes.
Okay.
That's where I'm
where
comfortable.
My head is
Yeah,
at.
I'm comfortable.
Okay. Yeah, otherwise, I think I would also want to see that analysis and who that impacts. But I feel comfortable with this as presented. Any other discussion? Is there a motion effective July 9th, 2018, to approve the Town of Simsbury tax sale policy as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks, Colleen. And I think the next important question is identifying counsel. Personally, I am leaning towards options B or C, which would be either going with our Bob DiCrescenzo's firm, our town attorney, or doing the RFQ process. I'm not opposed to Pullman and Comley, but I would want, if that firm arose as the top through the RFQ process, in my mind, that would be okay, but I would want to go through that process. So I'd like to hear where others are at with this.
Is there any reason not to use our town council for this?
I was surprised that that was in there. I mean, you know, we've had him and he's never stepped up to say that they could do them until, you know, we brought Adam last time. He has done, you know, we've always done foreclosures. And when we have met to try to do tax sales years ago, we were going to do them. You know, he always said that was the way to go, but
Right.
he never offered to do them. And then in 16, he did say, oh, I have somebody in my firm who does tax sales. And I said, okay, so that's when we tried it. That person has since left. And I've never heard up until now that they would be willing to do them again. So that just kind of surprised me. Otherwise, I probably would have been doing that all along.
You would have been doing
And the
that.
only reason why I had checked with Attorney Cohen is because that's kind of his specialty. He
Right.
does them for so many towns, and he's an expert at them, and I'm so comfortable with him. So that was the only reason why I called him to ask
Right.
him to come up.
I just didn't know if there was some particular reason why we wouldn't use the attorneys we have.
I don't know.
It's not a particularly complex
It's,
process, it's a process.
it's a process, and you have to be very specific on dates and
Exactly,
time.
it's sort of a checklist process.
Right.
and
I don't
we
think
would-
Bob does them, so I don't know who in his office, you know, he would appoint to do them, or who does them in his office. Like I said, I didn't even know that they were willing to do it, so.
Yeah, so Maria, have you confirmed that there is someone in his office who does have that expertise?
Right, so Bob has said that if we wanted to use his firm to do this particular work, that they could provide that service. We did ask him for a fee structure regarding that. We are hoping to have it in advance of the meeting this evening. We do not yet have that. So, I mean, we could always, if folks are most interested in option B, but you want to see the fee proposal essentially for that particular scope of work, we could certainly table this and wait to the next meeting until we do have that information from Bob and his firm.
I assume it would not fall under our general retainer because we would have to separately account for it anyway.
Correct.
Because it's reimbursable at some point, perhaps.
I would support that, and Eric, I think there's enough perceived conflict of interest with Pullman and Comley that it would be judicious to go with either option B or option C. So,
Okay. Would it make sense to actually see what their fee structure
Yep.
is before moving
Absolutely.
forward with that? That's
Yeah.
what I would recommend.
I'd like to see that.
Okay. So in that case, just to be clear, we have approved the tax sale policy. We're tabling the question about legal counsel, which I hope that we can take up at our next meeting. Yeah.
You don't have the meeting in July, right?
It would be August 13th. Do you have concerns from a time frame perspective about having that month?
No, I mean, I think it will be important for us to move forward with this, but again, this isn't a process that we've been doing to date, so there truly isn't a sense of urgency. So I think we would be okay to wait a month.
Okay. Do we need a motion to table this?
Yeah, so moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to item E is the proposed appointment of the interim planning and community development director. So last month, Jamie Rabbit submitted his resignation as director of planning and community development. Our town manager, as we heard earlier, has initiated the process of finding a replacement. In the meantime, her recommendation is that assistant town planner Mike Glidden serve in the director role in the interim. Anything you want to add, Maria?
Sure, great, thank you. So currently, Mike's job description does allow for him to serve as acting director as the assistant town planner. But since we are anticipating that this will be somewhat for a duration, most likely of at least a couple of months while we're conducting the recruitment, I thought it was important to officially appoint him as the interim director. This is similar to situations earlier this spring when we had a few interim appointments where the charter is silent on interim appointments, but that our town attorney's advice has been that I bring those recommendations to you all for appointment. This particular position in the charter does not require that we go to the various land use bodies first. Some positions it does require going to various commissions. This particular position, it's just a recommendation from myself to you all in regards to the permanent position. And again, Bob's advice was sort of follow the process for the permanent position for interim appointments. But I feel, very confident that Mike will do an excellent job in the interim role and would hope that you would support that recommendation.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay. It's a rather lengthy motion. Is there a motion to appoint Michael N. Glidden to the position of interim planning and community development director, effective July 9th, 2018, until the date upon the permanent planning and community development director officially begins work in Simsbury? Further move to increase Mr. Glidden's salary to $93,791 on an annualized basis during his interim appointment as planning and community development director, and that his other employment-related benefits as an affiliated employee remain in place. At the conclusion of his service as interim planning and community development director, and if he is not appointed to the permanent planning and community development director position, Mr. Glidden shall be permitted to return to his position as assistant town planner with the salary and employment-related benefits assigned to that position.
So moved. Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thanks
for doing that, Mike.
Thanks
Thanks a lot,
Mike.
Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
And finally, item F is the draft Economic Development Commission ordinance. And for that, I put together a brief PowerPoint presentation. Obviously, the draft ordinance is in our packet, but I wanted to make it clear to the public what we're proposing. What?
I said I like presentations.
Oh, I was actually thinking about you when I made it, Chris.
When I first saw it, I said, oh, this has Chris Kelly all over it.
But he didn't suggest it. I thought
I
about
know,
it.
I
Yeah.
think that's great.
Now he's inside your head,
Great.
Eric.
Yeah.
Now it's Wick.
Is it waking up?
It's waking up.
That's blue.
Oh, perfect. I think so. Oh, yes, here we go.
So what I'd like to do tonight is get the board's feedback on this. Please ask questions, propose changes, and then if the board is supportive, we can schedule a public hearing for next month. So next slide, please. Great. I apologize. I didn't bring my glasses, so I have it up on my computer. So a little history on how we got here. Yeah, I'm sure you're, actually, let me.
They're not prescription.
Oh, there's no way I can look through those. No, we're good. Okay, Mike, thank you. So first, thank you also, Cheryl, for serving with me on this work group, and please chime in anytime. So the revised charter that took effect last December states that the Board of Selectmen shall, by ordinance, create an Economic Development Commission. At our March 26th meeting, the board voted to create this work group, and since that meeting, the work group has met 4 times, and we've gotten input from the business community, various boards and commissions, and other members of the public that was used to inform this ordinance. The purpose of an Economic Development Commission, and this is in the proposed ordinance, would be to serve as in an advisory capacity to the Board of Selectmen. It'll promote and develop the economic resources of the town and advance the town's economic development goals as defined by the Board of Selectmen. And I highlight that last sentence, as defined by the Board of Selectmen, because that's going to be, I think, a really important task that we have once the commission is formed and up and running. The membership, proposed membership, there would be 7 voting members who would serve 3-year terms that would be staggered, and there was a lot of conversation around the right term length. I think we felt that 2 was a little too short, and 4 might be asking a little too much. So I think 3 was a compromise. Anything you would add there, Cheryl?
And we came to that decision with a lot of input from current, members of the past EOC, Main Street Partnership, the Chamber. We had, I would say, significant input on that part of it, so.
I'll say the past EDC, okay. The past EDC put together, I thought, a really thoughtful set of recommendations for what the new EDC should look like, and we really started with that and I think used large portions of it. No member shall serve more than 2 full 3-year terms. So I think the idea here is that we want to make sure that this commission remains, we bring new ideas in and keep that, that new blood.
Right, fresh ideas, fresh viewpoints.
Appointments to the commission are intended to be nonpartisan, based on qualifications and experience by the Board of Selectmen. So the old EDC had originally proposed 7 members, 3 unaffiliated, 2 Republicans, and 2 Democrats. And what we're proposing is that we identify the skill sets that we're looking for, the kinds of experience we're looking for, and then identify people to fill those without considering party affiliation.
Will that work with minority representation requirement in the state? We have that problem with our boards and commissions in general. We have to have minority representation.
I'm wondering if, as an exercise, if we were to identify the people who we wanted based on their qualifications, and then looked at the partisan makeup sort of after that point.
Are you sure it would apply to this? This is not a charter-based.
We did it for the technology task force. We do it for culture, parks and rec. We do it for recycling. We do, the guidance, at least that I've always understood, is that we have to. It's not something we wanted to do, but it's minority representation requirements at the state level force us to do it.
Maria?
We did have Bob review this on a couple of occasions, and he didn't raise that issue, but I could certainly bring that back to him and just confirm whether or not that would be an issue. But we can double check.
I'm not an advocate for it, but it's.
Yeah, I
I
appreciate you bringing that up.
I was under the impression that it wasn't going to apply. The fact that we do it for those boards and commissions does not necessarily mean we have to. I'm not making any comment on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I know, for instance, like the Community for Care, we don't do it for that. We have
Technology
other.
Task Force, we did. I don't know why.
I don't know if
did
we
it.
had to.
History of that.
The former first selectman indicated we needed to for minority representation purposes, so.
Why doesn't Maria bring that question specifically to
Yeah,
Bob,
absolutely.
and we can see if we need to
Yeah.
change that?
Certainly if we're required to, but.
Yeah. And we discussed the frequency of meetings. I think our feeling was that twice a month is asking a lot of a non-elected board. And once a month is right, and if they needed additional meetings, if they were to form, work groups, they could do that and meet more frequently if needed.
You guys have any discussion around those coinciding with the land use process?
We had discussion around the land use, members of land use boards serving as possibly members or ex officio members. But what are you thinking more specifically, Sean?
When we redid design review, didn't we have them start and meet in conjunction, or one of the recommendations was to have design review and zoning kind of go around the same time? Because if developers and attorneys were coming in, if you do different meetings, you're paying attorneys multiple times.
Yeah.
Actually, the only commission that we discussed putting sort of adjacent to this or in conjunction with this was tourism. We had a lot of discussion around having the tourism committee sort of go with, because we saw those two activities as advancing the same goals, pretty much. But we did not feel like we had to align them specifically with a land use board. We did consider whether they should be included ex officio or one of those. And whether the new EDC should liaison to the land use boards themselves.
That was where I was going next.
Yes.
I don't think the land use board should be liaisons.
I don't
to
think they
EDC.
should, yeah.
EDC should be going
And
to the
that's
land
where
use
we were,
commission.
that's where we landed, was that it should go the other way. And that,
One of the challenges of the prior board is that there was a misplaced notion that
yes.
Yeah.
folks should want to come in and be anointed by them versus them
Right.
participating in the process.
So we were leaning more the opposite direction, that the new EDC should consider appointing liaisons to the land use boards, just to make sure we had a full circle of information
It's a good idea.
among those boards. And because the new EDC will report back to the Board of Selectmen, we would have some control over that.
The other thing I wanted to
Let's
add
do.
to Sean's question about businesses coming before the EDC, I know that happened with some frequency with the old EDC. And again, we haven't tasked the new EDC, so I don't want to
Right.
speak too much, but I'm not picturing that, I don't think businesses need another meeting to go to.
Agreed.
So that's not, I'm not saying businesses would never come before the EDC, but that's not what I'm really seeing as the primary role.
Right.
And I think if it does, then I think it would make sense for us to influence the alignment of meetings. Any other questions on this page? Okay. So it was the recommendation from Maria, and I thought this was a really good idea, that there are some things that should be outlined in the ordinance, and there are other things that we can do by resolution. And the thought is that if we do the membership slots by resolution, that's something that we can change as the need arises, whereas obviously changing the ordinance is more, time-consuming. So the 7 slots that we would propose, 1 member representing the Simsbury development community, so this could be commercial or residential, 3 members representing the Simsbury business community, 1 member with land use or architectural expertise, someone with marketing, PR, or communication expertise, and then 1 member with tourism expertise, and that may or may not be a member of the tourism committee. That's something, the tourism committee is a whole nother,
Right.
piece of this that we need to talk about. Is there any thoughts or feedback on that composition?
So Eric and Cheryl, you see this, because a concept that you've both shared with me that I like is this commission really integrating effectively with tourism, with Main Street, with Chamber of Commerce, kind of a much tighter integration. So this membership slots seems to support that, do you think?
Yes, and by making it a resolution of the Board of Selectmen rather than an ordinance provision, we left ourselves more flexibility
Right, okay.
to achieve that goal.
And if we don't have somebody with those qualifications during a specific time, does it just default to
All right,
an
then
interested party?
it's completely within the discretion of the Board of Selectmen.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Defining it, so.
But we're
Yeah, so if we
resolving
don't have-
it, so.
If we
So
didn't
we-
come up with a person who had tourism, I'm not picking on tourism, but it's one slot. So would we be open to somebody else who didn't have tourism experience? And it would be potentially somebody who, you could have two developers on the committee?
I see it as a flexible format.
I appreciate anybody who volunteers their time, no
Right,
matter what their
exactly.
expertise
Yeah.
is. But I was asking, do you have flexibility then to add in language as if we can appoint?
Yeah, I mean,
Whatever.
this is something we can just do we can change this at any meeting by
And if we-
resolution.
And if we have a particular candidate in front of us, we can say, well, for this reason, we're going to appoint this person.
Yeah, I just don't want to do all this work and then it be hamstrung because you don't have somebody who's defined.
Again, that's why it would be a Board of Selectmen resolution rather than in the ordinance. We're trying to leave the ordinance as bare bones as possible, to leave us with more discretion in that.
Yeah, Maria.
To Chris's point, we could certainly, for the separate policy resolution that we would bring forward, address that through language of the policy resolution, or at least address it within the context of the cover memo. So again, that there would be something for, any person to be able to look back on and again, understand what the intent was. So again, I think we could certainly address that through the cover memo or the policy resolution, and I'll make a note of that to do that.
Yeah, I would ask that you put it in the policy resolution, because what I see happening is in 4 years, we all start fighting about, you gotta have one person on tourism, and did we mean that hard language or soft language, and
Yeah.
I agree with the flexibility, let's just make sure that that intent carries forward.
Appreciate that.
And I would also think along those lines that it's not someone from the tourism committee or someone from Main Street or the chamber or something else. It's a specific person that we are appointing.
But we intentionally left out the names of the
Yeah.
organizations that.
But my point is down the road to kind of taking Sean's comment and going out from it. It's not a particular group that they send a representative to
Exactly.
this.
Right.
It is a specific person who we are appointing.
We saw it as not reserving a seat, so to speak, for, Main Street does not have a seat. The Chamber does not have a seat. This could be anybody either in or out of those organizations.
Makes sense.
No, I think that's good.
So as we talk about, we left I like that we left the goals open-ended, right? We're not trying to define that there. But the membership will largely depend on our goals, right? Do we want to stay more inwardly focused in growing Simsbury businesses? Or are we looking more outwardly focused to attract business, or is it some semblance of both, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sean. I think since this is a resolution, and again, we're not voting on this
Yeah, I
tonight,
know.
as we develop, I think we should, actually, I'm thinking out loud here, but it's making me think that we should develop what are we tasking this board with, and then determine who do we need to do the work.
Right.
Originally, I was thinking, let's get the board and then figure out what we want them to do, but I'm actually thinking the other way around, Mike.
Right, because if we want infrastructure funds and ways to help current businesses, that's a different skill set than we want to go recruit the next Jackson Labs to go sit on the Hartford property, right?
Absolutely.
I like the way you're thinking. But
That's,
again,
I mean, that's been the challenge of the EDC in the past, is some folks on this board, on that board, we have the inner focus, and some folks have the outward focus, and then some folks just have 60 years of history. So,
Well, as Eric said, I think the important point here is that we need to set the goals.
Yep.
And then we go set up the people.
so to that end, is there something we can put in here that forces us to do that? Because it says we're going to do it, but that's the problem we've run into. There's no date, there's no time period that we have to do it. And it's well-intentioned, but that's one of the challenges we've had is we don't dedicate a time or a meeting where on October
Yeah.
16th, we must hand down the following,
Well, I
we
think.
must hand down a 2-year
Right.
goal.
And for this one, you could say we have to have the goals in place before we appoint our first EDC.
Yes, I think that's the way we get
And
around.
that is going to push us forward.
I guess it's just,
Are you worried about going forward, Sean?
going forward, I mean, because, again, I think this is a great framework, and I think it does give us the flexibility. We're requiring each year for the commission to come in
Yes.
and report to us. I think to hold us accountable and to make this commission more effective, we need to annually or every other year, whatever it is, we will lay out the goals and priorities for the EDC to go enact
When
in
we-
conjunction with them, or
Yeah.
whatever the process is, and we can do that by resolution too. But that there needs to be a date where we need to be accountable.
Agreed. And when we discussed this in our work group, our feeling was that should happen before budget discussions begin, so that,
Agreed.
that was part of the reason for aiming for a fall start date, because we wanted to be able to address our priorities for economic development in the budget process. So if we, pick a date or a time frame around that, I think that's a,
So they come in
Have
October?
October is the
Yeah.
reporting.
Right.
Right.
So we owe them goals
Yeah.
in
That
November,
was our goal
December,
with that.
whatever it is,
that in September, we have to have goals in place for the October,
Yeah.
so,
I would think it would be the other way. They would report to us on the prior year's goals, and we
On
would
the prior
either
year.
continue or revise the goals going forward.
but for the kickoff.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need to give them ahead of time, but in the future, it would be report in October,
Exactly, and that was,
update, revision, goals in November, whatever it is.
that was the reasoning behind the October date,
Yeah,
to get that in before the budget.
no, I like that, because, again, you heard me use the words infrastructure fund. We used to have one. Again,
Yeah,
if that's gonna be
understood.
something we're gonna do, needs to go in the budget.
And within the budget, if we're going to task them with something else, that needs to be in the budget. We need to put it in our goals.
Yeah, we can't just make them do it and not fund it.
Well, and the budget starts July 1, so they're going to need it well before September, October.
Yeah, it's tricky.
I mean, I think it's doable. I just,
We'll have to pay attention to that.
yeah, we will.
So let's do the,
Well, it's gonna take some discipline on this board's part to make sure that we
so we got
fit
the
our.
boss. That's why we got the boss.
That's exactly
The
right.
hammer.
But if we're doing it in October, that begins to feed the next budget cycle.
Well, that was the point,
Right,
yeah, that
exactly,
we
yeah,
have,
so it's actually in sync with the budget cycle.
right.
Yeah.
And that's what we were trying to do, is set up that synchronized schedule.
Yep.
So that the
a good
budget
idea.
process is more effective, when it comes to economic development goals.
Sorry, I know you were talking about membership and I took us down another road.
No, this is a good conversation. So we talked about a lot of good things. Are you proposing anything actually be added to the ordinance to clarify?
I think we should. I think there should be some sort of goal-setting date, however vague or concrete, but there's a date for this board to meet with that commission and lay it out in conjunction with the town manager, in conjunction with planning staff. However it needs to be, whether the date's in there and then there's a resolution that we can use to update it as we learn, or, so that, again, to your same guidance, which I think is great, of let's not put in the ordinance if we don't have to, because we're still learning and we're still being flexible here. But again, as one of the failures I saw was in the prior Board of Selectmen's, we didn't sit down and prioritize what we wanted, and we all had a different vision, and
Right.
I see us making that mistake again if we don't have an accountability.
Absolutely.
So could we say something around, we need to give them, their revised goals or reaffirm their goals within 60 days of their presentation to us?
Yeah,
Yeah, and it
Well,
fits right into that
And,
report section.
and that
the
puts you
wording.
into the
Yeah.
beginning of the budget.
yeah, in conjunction with town staff and town manager, whatever it needs to say.
Since their date is the 31st of October, I'm a little uncomfortable putting that at 60 days. That puts us
That's-
into January, really.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
Because what do you think the chances are that this board is going to meet to do goal setting in December of,
We don't get December off.
I know we
We don't
don't.
get July off.
I know, I understand that, but
We
lots
don't?
of other things happen in,
I know.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm all for a different time, but I mean, again, if we're serious.
well,
about
what
it-
I'm thinking is within 30 days of their,
Yeah, I think 30 days.
I'm fine with 30.
Yeah.
Sure.
yeah.
so let's just make it
So-
by November,
Right,
November
so-
30th.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want more meetings, but I think we can do it in conjunction with our meetings, but
right.
again.
If we're having somewhat regular touch points, because we're gonna have board representation on their meetings. We're gonna be somewhat hearing about what is being considered. So I can't imagine the 31st of October, seeing if their year-end report is gonna be anything of a big surprise.
No.
Right.
So we're gonna have already had an idea,
We're
so
already gonna
we
know,
won't need a whole more year to even consider it, so.
Yeah.
Let's just give ourselves 30 days, and we, as we said earlier, we can revise whatever we need to.
Right.
And
The first year is going to be hard because it's the heaviest lifting because we've got to start this out. Once we get it going and we've
Once you
got a
get
good
going.
process, I don't envision this taking.
And that will also
more than a
keep
regular
us
meeting's amount
ahead
of time.
of the swearing in of any, new board
That's
on
right.
those years.
Yeah.
So that'll be, the
Again, there's
finishing
always-
of the term for the old board.
We can do the goals on 2-year cycles too.
Nah, I don't think that's such a good idea.
I mean, economic development typically is a longer-term vision versus continual short-term changes, right? But
It is, but I think for us, at least starting out, because we have not done this in the past on a regular basis, that we should discipline ourselves to some goal setting.
that's fine.
And even if it's reaffirming the goals that.
Even if
already
it's
working
just a review. Things change, as we've seen over the last 6 months, we've had a lot of things happen and,
I mean, at the end of the day, we got rid of the old one. We're putting a new one. We put significant language in the town manager's job description. We put significant language
Right.
in pretty much everybody's job description around here. It needs to be
to
in our
move it
job
forward.
description.
Exactly, it
as
should be
well,
part of
to-
ours too,
I think it's
It's a way to
consistent with what
score.
we've been doing for the last 2 years.
absolutely.
Okay. Any other feedback? Yeah, Melissa.
We're planning on doing goal setting for you all just in general. Would it make sense to try to align that goal setting? If we're planning now for late summer, early fall, if that's gonna be a regular thing, is there a way to
Oh,
align
they're
that?
but they're somewhat two separate. I would kind of be hoping that I was thinking, around the EDC, our mind is unencumbered by sort of any
Trash
other sort of other goal setting or thing. I mean, because right now, we've got to get that right. We've got to get it right and
Right.
get it up and running. So I'm a proponent of maybe initially having two separate ones, maybe in the future.
I think for now, I agree
Contracting
with Chris
them.
on this one, that's,
Yeah. To me, the one that we're planning in a couple of months is bigger scope than just economic development.
As much as I'd like to have one meeting, I think having two makes a lot more
Let
sense.
the record
No, I
reflect that Chris
appreciate it,
wants 2
Melissa.
meetings.
Just once.
just this one time.
All right. Is there a motion?
Eric.
Yeah, oh,
So
sure.
just because we would be sending this to public hearing, if folks are feeling comfortable with this one amendment, I think we need to define what that amendment would read, or how that would read. So I was just trying to do a bit of wordsmithing while you all were chatting. Perhaps we could insert this under organization, maybe as a section E, a heading to the effect of direction from Board of Selectmen, or maybe policy direction from Board of Selectmen, with a sentence, the Board of Selectmen will provide direction and goals to the commission on an annual basis on or before the 30th day of November of each year. Is that summarizing? Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Simple.
I'm comfortable with it going under the organization
Yeah.
section as a new E?
That's fine.
Okay. And the heading direction from Board of Selectmen, or do you want it to read policy direction from Board of Selectmen?
I think it's more policy. I would think it would be more policy than specific direction.
I know I'm gonna be contrary here, but I would be more comfortable with that under reports,
Under reports?
because I think it's, sort of in sync with the reporting we're asking the EDC to do, and as it shows a commitment on our part to report to them, and their commitment to report to us, I just,
Sure.
I think that makes sense, sure.
Okay.
So
I'll
that
go.
will be the last sentence in that paragraph.
you might have to just break that into two,
A and B, whatever it is. yeah.
Got it.
A, B, whatever.
I do have a couple more questions before we pass this thing.
Of course.
Expenses.
Oh, huh.
I don't
We were talking about this. this
particularly care for that one,
morning. Wait, where are you looking?
that we're going to let appointed commission members incur expenses.
Only with permission of the town manager.
Do we let any other board or commission do that?
All of them, I think. Well, I know it for us, and
We're in the, that's a different, we're in the charter.
Well, we could go back and look at it. But it was, I know it was all in the old charter.
So one thing I learned today that some EDCs are given a very small budget, which could be used for sort of some of those incidental things like travel expenses.
You mean as if they were gonna attend forums?
Yeah.
Could we make it that something that they would just come to us for a request? I mean, I think Sean makes a good point.
Yeah.
We don't have any, and the language doesn't exist for any other.
When you allocate funds, they get spent. If there's a need, I'm all for expending funds, but are we creating a need?
I think it's covered under B. It says that in the performance of its duties, the commission shall not incur any expense or obligate the town to pay any expense unless funds have been appropriated by the town specifically for use by the commission and authorized in advance by the town manager. I'm pretty comfortable.
Melissa, do you know if that mimics the language that applies to the Board of Selectmen? Do you have the charter on your?
Oh, no, there's no language like this for the Board of Selectmen in the charter.
There was.
The statute will be putting.
Oh, A or B?
There is a state statute on it?
That allows us to create an EDC.
So that particular language, we looked at a number of sample ordinances and, sort of borrowed language from different components based on feedback. And the thought when we had drafted that particular section A was maybe if we had, let's say, 3 EDC members who wanted to attend perhaps a workshop being sponsored by cost. And if there was, a modest, fee, say, a $25 fee to attend, that would be something, again, that would be reasonable. If there were funds within the budget that we could certainly say, okay, we'll reimburse you to attend that cost workshop or something of that nature. But that they certainly, wouldn't be compensated for serving on the board. But again, if there was some sort of small nominal amount to attend those types of workshops or events that, again, if funds were available in the budget, that we could at least reimburse them for the registration cost.
I thought that came up when we did the Economic Development Task Force also as part of, onboarding members, that the education of board and commission members may require the expenditure of funds to educate them in the process.
Well, I know
So,
that.
Sean, is your question that,
Wouldn't that be budgeted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would, to me, that pertains to B, as Mike is saying.
yeah, but I'm confused. Is Sean's question just that adding that language in, not debating the value of the language or the purpose of the language, but adding language in, is that incongruous with our other ordinances for the organization of other committees in town? That's,
I think this clarifies questions that are naturally going to come up very quickly. We want to go to, an event.
so how do we
then
do
we
that
can-
when the Parks and Rec Committee, if they have something that's being held at a local college, and they want to go attend?
I know, for instance, at planning and zoning, when they have training seminars or conservation, that's within the budget for those departments, and dollars are spent to go for training, so they know how to handle applications.
They just do it internally.
Well, it gets initially approved by the Board of Selectmen, goes into the budget, then gets approved by the citizens, and the dollars are then within the budget for use.
So the safety net here is that the town manager has to approve these in advance, so they can't go incur the expenses and then walk in and submit a reimbursement request.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in light of that, I'm fine with it being in there for now, but this is not a license to start going to every EDC conference on the East Coast, is what my fear is.
And Sean, there's a secondary safety. Are available in the town's approved budget and authorized in
Right.
advance by the town manager, so.
Agreed.
Yep.
Would
we want to, I'm not trying to overcomplicate this, but, could we add a dollar threshold? If it goes above that, it needs to be approved by the Board of Selectmen?
No.
I mean, I'm not
Too
proposing
specific
that.
for the ordinance.
I'm comfortable. Chris is right, there's 2 hooks. One, there's gotta be a budget, so we need to be talking about this
Right.
ahead of time for any sizable expenditure, and Maria has to approve it. And obviously, there's the accountability of, if it goes outside the budget, we get to approve the interdepartmental transfers at the end of the year, and if we have a problem with it, we can address it at that
Okay.
point.
Melissa, are we going to jump in?
Yeah, the legislation says any municipality which establishes an EDC may annually appropriate for its purpose a sum not exceeding 1/20th of 1% of the last completed grant list of taxable property. So we're also limited how much we can actually budget.
So we're nay. Not shall.
Yeah.
So we can do nada, or we can do
More.
more.
Maria?
And
I
just,
learned that from you.
sorry, and just one quick logistical item. So for example, to Mike's point, our land use agencies right now may go to training. And what's helpful is that it's budgeted within the planning department budget. And so there's a department head that can oversee those expenditures and sort of serve in this capacity. But we don't have a separate economic development department. We don't have a separate economic development director. So naturally, we just sort of felt that since our office will be staffing the commission, that was sort of a good home base for a department to be reviewing any proposed expenditures that the commissioners would have.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. Was there any other questions or feedback?
So, just again, we were talking about ex officio members and liaisons. Right, so, I know I read it before, but point me again in there where we talk about
That would be at the end under the,
non-voting members.
yeah, under ex officio members.
And that's
It would
by
be under the
resolution,
resolution.
not in the ordinance.
So okay, so, but there's no requirement in here that the EDC
No,
attend land use or otherwise?
nope, there is not.
So do we
That
have
could
this-
be, end up in the goals, though, right?
Well,
Okay.
that can go in our actual final ordinance where we can direct them there. And that would also give us the ability, if we wanted to change that for some reason.
I just want to make sure that if, because again, that's where we've gotten hung up in the past. If we are looking for EDC to be gauging economic value of projects and endorsing, et cetera, in the future, we don't want to create this where there's another meeting and.
Right.
So if we feel like we can address that in resolution and goals, that's fine, but I want it to be clear that land use or developers are not expected to come in and sit for another meeting with the EDC.
That-
I don't think we've implied that.
That's been the practice for the last 50
I
years.
understand, that's why we're
I
starting
just
over.
want to be crystal
Right.
clear that that's not the practice
That
going
is
forward.
not what we're aiming for here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had one more. I did read this. I read it twice, actually. We can fire him anytime we want to?
For
For co-
So I
for
love,
absences.
for absence.
so
Or for
Absences
cause.
And,
I like it, it's bold. It's interesting. Do we do that for other boards and commissions? I
other
looked-
boards and commissions are not created by ordinance.
They're appointed by us.
Some of them are, some of them aren't, but
It's interesting.
this is new.
So I love the requirement of attendance, because that's been a challenge, and I love the action in there. I just, it's one thing to put it down, it's another thing to haul somebody in here and fire them. And that's,
If they haven't attended more than 50% of the meetings, then they're probably not going to object to the removal from the board. That was our feeling, is you have to show a certain level of commitment, particularly for a very important commission like this.
no, I'm not objecting to it, it's just, this is where the left in me comes out. We generally don't fire volunteers, right? And I just want to be careful with putting that in words. So if we're okay with this, but this is it's new territory for us. I'm not objecting to it, but it's,
Well, part of, one of the problems anyway, that the old EDC had was a quorum. They were unable to pass even some of the simplest resolutions for a lack of a quorum month after month. And our feeling, I think, between, at least for me and Eric, was that this commission is a priority, that we feel very strongly that this is an important commission.
I'm good with B. I'm
and-
bringing up A.
Yeah.
B is removal for not attending. A is removal for cause. There's two removal provisions. I'm not objecting in any way to B. But are we comfortable with A, that cause is not defined, and again, I'm not looking to define costs tonight, but if for whatever reason, person X makes the town manager of the future mad, town manager comes in here and says, get rid of this person, Board of Selectmen anoints that, is that really what we want to do for a board and commission?
Fair point.
Well, let's ask the question, can we technically remove a person from technology, other appointed, Community for Care,
I don't know.
Technology Task Force? I mean, if we can, all this is doing is putting wording to that.
Yeah.
It's just identifying power that we already have. If we can't do that, then obviously we shouldn't be putting this in there, so.
But
And you're right, it's not a practice. I don't necessarily look at this as a practice that's gonna come up often.
Yeah, I know.
Again, I'm not objecting to it, it feels like new territory.
It is.
It is new territory.
It is.
Well, I think we should go to town attorney and find out, can we,
Well, I think
Fire them,
he's
ask
already
them to
looked at this.
resign.
We've
Yes.
already had it looked at.
we have, okay.
Yeah, Maria?
Sure, again, looking at some sample ordinances, some ordinances have this language, and I think it's usually obviously rare exceptions when you have an advisory committee member that may be conducting themselves in a way that's not appropriate. So again, I think this would be a good, for example, that, perhaps if you had an advisory committee member who was perhaps violating our harassment policy and harassing a staff member, and you wanted the ability to remove that person, this would provide a, notice that you had that ability to bring someone in, review the matter with them, and then potentially dismiss them, or if they were misusing their position on the EDC for personal gain in a way that conflicted with our ethics code. These were just a couple of the 4 examples that I was thinking of as I was reading the sample language and some other ordinances. Again, I think that would be fairly rare that those instances might occur, but essentially just to provide notice that, hey, if you're, doing something inappropriate in connection with your official duties, we may need to potentially remove you.
So those are great points. I'm fine with leaving it in there, but for the next meeting, can we come back and find out, to Chris's question, does that apply to other appointed boards and commissions, where were they appointing authority?
Yeah, I'm just surprised we don't have
And if so,
that for every,
The Board of Selectmen has the power to investigate any board and commission.
right, but it
member
doesn't
who's,
make clear, I don't know what our power is to remove.
Does anyone have a copy of the charter on their,
It doesn't talk about removal.
Yeah,
it just goes back to
But you bring up great points. If
think it is.
if somebody from
Board of
Culture Parks and
Selectmen's
Rec is
power to
harassing town staff,
commissions?
we need to protect town staff the same way.
yeah, so again, are we,
Make sure.
give me clarity on the expense issue, but are we now, are we overlaying more organizational structure that doesn't exist on other committees that should?
Well, I
But
think
may
the-
exist in in the charter someplace else.
The power either exists or it doesn't. I mean, there's no ambiguity as to whether the power exists or it doesn't. It's only unclear to us right now. I think it's a valid point. If this was looked at by the town attorney, obviously, it's fair to assume that we have that power. I think it is worth just clarifying that.
How we would handle it for other committees.
In all likelihood, we probably do. Yeah, it's just we've never run into a situation where.
right.
I'm not looking to
That's been warranted.
exercise it, it was just we need
Yeah.
clarity
No,
across
and-
the board.
No, we should know.
Yeah, that's a
Sorry.
good question.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly ask Bob for clarification how we would handle it for other advisory committees if we were in that
Right.
situation.
Okay.
Well, and we haven't set up a commission by ordinance before. Any of them.
Yeah.
There's very few, I think technically we have an ordinance on the police commission.
Oh, well,
That was a while ago.
That was a long time ago.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's,
Early 90s.
Yeah.
okay, I take it back.
93.
But there aren't a lot of examples.
Before my time.
Any other feedback or proposed changes?
So despite all my questions, I think this is great.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sean, it's
Good
great.
stuff.
Is there a motion to schedule a public hearing for 6 PM at the Board of Selectmen's regular meeting on August 13th, 2018, to solicit public comment regarding the proposed adoption of the Economic Development Commission ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and that passes unanimously. We have no appointments and resignations. Any proposed changes to the minutes from our last meeting? Okay, then they stand. Any liaison and subcommittee reports?
So,
No? Okay. Under communication, we have a number of items. I've got one in particular that I wanted to bring up. Are there others? Actually, you don't know which one I'm going to bring up, so I better tell you. I'm glad Mike Glidden is here. He included a memo on short-term rentals, and I just wanted to give this board and the public a little more context about the background on that. So there are about 17 properties that have been identified around town that are listed on one of several short-term rental websites like Airbnb. And it's the opinion of the zoning enforcement officer that short-term rentals are not a permitted use according to our zoning regulations. So the owners of those properties are going to be receiving a letter shortly informing them of that. The zoning commission is scheduled to discuss this issue at its meeting 1 week from tonight to determine if it's something that it wants to regulate through zoning regulations. They may determine that it's something that makes more sense to tackle through ordinance with the Board of Selectmen, and there are some some advantages of doing this through ordinance rather than through zoning. So where my head is at, I personally have no interest in prohibiting short-term rentals through websites like Airbnb, but there may be a public interest in regulating short-term rentals to protect quality of life in neighborhoods, ensuring safety and things like that, and that's something that Mike could elaborate on if he wants to, or people have questions.
That would be great.
So, do you mind?
I would like to hear the rationale
Yeah, do you mind
behind
saying
that.
a few words? So the other piece of this is we have received some complaints about Airbnbs being a nuisance in neighborhoods.
So, my memo that Robin Newton, the code compliance officer, she's zoning officer, we both of us developed this to outline to you some of the disciplines and areas that we see as concerns for this use. As Eric alluded to, he did a great job outlining some of the major issues such as quality of life, potential impact to the neighborhoods. More importantly, we were also looking at it from a public safety perspective, whether it be the state building code, fire prevention code, or the state health code, how these things, all these codes together treat these uses differently than just your average single-family home. We had talked to Bob DiCrescenzo before in drafting, I think you have it in your packet, that letter that will be going out to the 17 operators in town. It's not just Airbnb, they're using HomeAway, AVO, another website that provides this service. From a zoning standpoint, we run up with an issue with the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is a federal law that basically tells communities you can't treat someone different whether they own their house or they rent their house. So we will be having that discussion with the zoning commission, and if they have an interest in regulating it, we will be developing some regulations, and they may change their regs to address this. The other concept was the potential ordinance, which is really, it's a licensing process, getting information on making sure, one, that the site is safe, secure, two, some kind of quality of life issues, such as are there sufficient parking on site? Secondly, is do we have a direct contact to a potential property owner? Should an issue arise that you need to contact someone? And lastly, is just that whole way to protect the neighborhood, other sort of things of like health code, et cetera. I think those are some of the main points that are outlined in my memo.
The other thing I just wanted to add is this is an issue that all of our neighboring towns are grappling with in one form or another. It comes up at a monthly meeting that we have.
I was just going to ask that, is presumably all 169 towns have the same problem, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting, just the past 30 days, we were at a planners conference in Hartford, and this subject was one of the discussions that they had. And you had an attorney who was presenting to the group, said, I represent private homeowners. And I'm telling private homeowners, if your town doesn't have regulations, quick, get a notarized statement saying that you have been doing this for a long time so that you can claim you're non-conforming should they adopt zoning regulations. And, in the planners in the room, everyone kind of stood back going, oh, well, we can't put our heads in the sand any longer. Not only that, it's just some of the concerns that I brought up earlier about building or fire prevention code, we just want to make sure if you're renting a unit, it's a safe unit. Not only that you're not interfering or causing some sort of quality of life issues with your neighbor, but we know that the people who are renting these places are going to a safe location. So that's why we felt, and once again, I mean, this is a little premature to say that we'll come up with an ordinance. The Zoning Commission will discuss this next week, and we'll have a better understanding which direction we'll go.
The exposure for the town legally by setting this?
Not yet, not at this point. I mean, we're telling people that this is a use that's not allowed, please stop doing this use. So if there was a situation where we had a unit that was unsafe, we've kind of told people, you need to stop renting it, take down the ad. So I don't think we're exposed at this point. I think we would be exposed more if we went status quo and say, we'll just ignore it, let it go. Someone, let's say, then rents like a bedroom, an area that's converted to a bedroom that's in a basement, and it doesn't have the proper escape routes out of it. Then I would say, just our task, we know that these ads are up there. I mean, they were easy. We had our admin staff, I mean, this is the stack of ads.
Yeah, no
For
question.
Simsbury alone.
How is this different than if somebody rents their house for a year?
I was just going to ask that question.
So, the way that these agreements work, it could be anywhere from a night to a few, for a week, and then another person comes in versus, so if I own a house and Sean, you come and say, I want to rent the house for the next year, there's a lease drawn up and you are my tenant, provided you're not subletting rooms out, you're the only person that I'm dealing with. From a zoning perspective, how we handle that currently, as long as it's not more than 5 unrelated people living in the house, it's considered a single-family housekeeping unit, so it's allowed, and that's where that Fair Housing Act comes into play, where you can't say, no, you can't rent your house out. You have to have that ability, either ownership or rental.
But we don't check for sprinklers or smoke detectors or where people are living for an annual rental with a lease, right?
Well, first off, if it's a home that received a certificate of occupancy, one will go with the understanding that at the time of the certificate of occupancy, that it met the fire prevention code or building code. Obviously, people can modify their house, even if they're owning it, and create an unsafe situation.
And plus, wouldn't landlord-tenant law apply to that situation?
In that case, yeah.
This would not be a short-term rental via a website. Anytime you rent your house to somebody and you become a landlord, or statutory landlord-tenant law would apply to you no matter what. So if you have a fire and you didn't have smoke detectors and the family you rented to, that's on you. So
how is a 1 day different than a 1 year based on that?
Well, in one way, the way I look at it is you rent a house for a year, the impact is still residential, as long as it's within the zoning ordinances, right? Family moves in, they live in it within a residential capacity. The specific catalyst to this conversation is a neighborhood who has identified, whether it's accurate or not, but they've identified that a particular house is being rented specifically as short-term party location. In my mind, that in essence is what an inn is or a hotel is. And so you now have a business that the impact is not residential, it's actually more of a business impact in an area that's not necessarily zoned for business.
And maybe to just clarify, our office has received complaints about some of the other operators in town, the fact that they are operating these short-term rentals. I don't want to get into specifics on the locations, but this is, the one that you heard about at your last meeting is not the only one that we've received complaints about. So hence why the reaction from us was that it's time that this issue should be looked into further.
I guess where I'm going with this, Chris, is this going to solve the problem? Because if the problem is violation of public gathering permits and noise, which we don't have an ordinance for, this doesn't necessarily solve the issue that was complained about at the last Board of Selectmen meeting. People having unregistered parties and too many people is not going to get fixed by the zoning commission looking at this, right?
So if you were to develop, we'll just give an example, you were to develop a licensing ordinance, you could include in the ordinance that this is specific to short-term residential rental units, and say that other activities such as hosting weddings, parties, etc., that is prohibited under the ordinance. Zoning could do the exact same thing. That would address those spin-off activities that are occurring. And if someone were to advertise, it would be in a violation of the either regs or ordinance, subject to citations potentially, or other enforcement actions by the town.
Let me say this another way. Is it more effective and quicker to pass a noise ordinance than to go through a complicated licensing and regulatory process?
I think we considered some noise ordinance possibilities at one time and found that that was very difficult also.
They're very.
I'm assuming that there's, in that stack of, I don't know, that stack is just solicitations, that stack is not complaints that have been brought to us, right? So we have a number of complaints passed, am I assuming correctly, we've had complaints just past what we heard at our last meeting. Is that what you said, Eric?
Yeah, that's one of them.
Okay, so are any of those complaints just the fact that a neighbor feels uncomfortable because there seems to be transient traffic in their neighbor's home, it makes them feel unsafe? That's not something that's gonna fall under
Right.
noise.
No, and
So-
so me, this is a philosophical conversation. I'm okay with, so I understand why someone would feel that way, but I don't personally feel like there's a public interest in us regulating that. But I think that we have an interest in potentially regulating loud noise, big parties, that would disturb life in a neighborhood. And again, tonight's not the night to debate it, because we have nothing in front of us, but I
So an
wanted.
ordinance, I would say, you do want to limit a facility that is an unregistered business from hosting a short-term event, essentially. Is that what we're trending towards that, though? You don't want to limit Airbnb, people having just nice, quiet families visiting Simsbury, because we're a wonderful community.
We're trying to promote tourism here, right?
Right?
Tourism.
But we don't want them to come to Simsbury because it's a beautiful landscape to throw a keg party on a farm. That's not a registered business that can hold outings and weddings and such.
Right, I mean, and I think one of the things, if this does get, referred to you all, if the land use bodies say, we think it's more appropriately handled through an ordinance, these are some of the kinds of policy issues we can work through. What I would suggest is that we would set up a subcommittee to work through an ordinance and some of these components, but, right, it would be regulating the use, and we could address what I would characterize as quality of life type issues, so it could be things, such as Mike indicated, that, folks who have a license to operate a short-term residential rental are not allowed to have events, or we could also look at things like parking, so we don't end up with people parking all over the street, or just starting to park all over lawns, and now you have dirt front yards and things of that nature. So we could certainly look at various quality of life components to the ordinance, and then if folks were violating that ordinance, they would essentially get their license or their certificate revoked. And that would be, I think, a pretty, strong deterrent from violating the ordinance.
That's a slippery slope, though. I agree with you in concept, but if somebody has a graduation party and they have 50 people park on the street, how is that not a?
But that would be the parking would be in connection to a short-term rental.
Correct.
Yeah,
I guess
exactly.
My point is we're talking about regulating stuff that's not even necessarily a problem. And yet we have graduation parties at our houses, we have birthday parties, we have bar mitzvahs.
Right,
we have-
but this is
Like the homeowner inviting their friends.
It's
Yeah.
50, so what? It's your house.
But this is.
Your right to have those people over. You're still parking on a public
I
street.
think we could dial in the language to say, if you're soliciting your residential home to hold an event, that's the way.
We've got a public gathering
permit.
permit process.
So,
Public gathering permit process applies when it's on public property.
Property,
The loophole is if it's on private property, they're not
Yeah,
subject
as
to the
many people
public
as well.
gathering permit.
So we're only going to restrict the homeowners that do this on a short-term basis, but if the guy that lives next door wants to have 75 people over, he can do that.
Yes.
But the guy that rents
We
it
are
for
making that
18.
distinction. So,
It's ridiculous.
look, I don't think I understand. I have no desire to regulate Airbnb, Uber, anything. The reality is, the internet has created unregulated businesses, right? Emerging, however, in business sectors that are heavily regulated. Taxi and limousines are a heavily regulated business. Hotels, inns are a heavily regulated business. So I don't want to regulate Airbnb, but there's always the push comes to shove moment, and here's the example, where in essence, people have created a business in an area that's not zoned for a business. We wouldn't allow them to come in and say, I'm going to open up I'm gonna put a gazebo in my backyard and run a wedding
Host weddings,
facility. I'm not gonna run a limousine service out of my home. So what we have here is a push come to shove moment where these unregulated businesses are having an impact that they're not supposed to have, and we have to begin to treat them, as a business. I don't want to do that, Sean, I would be reluctant to do it, but we do have an obligation to people who say, I'm having a negative impact as if this is a business, and the town has an obligation to manage that, which we would do if any other business was to emerge in that area.
I don't disagree with you, Chris. We're picking and choosing what problem we want to solve. If we don't want keg parties on farms, then we need to go after keg parties on farms, not target one microcosm of 17 residents that choose to rent out their house on a one-night basis, and one of them 2 years ago had a keg party on a house. If we don't want keg parties on farms, then again, let's fix the actual problem. But 2 years ago, somebody had a party that somebody doesn't like is different than regulating Airbnb.
Well, but we're not necessarily saying people can't do Airbnb. We're maybe regulating how it's being used.
What is the use of your property designated? Your property designated.
You're missing my point, though.
But that's a zoning
If
issue.
we have a problem with
How do
people
you
having
use your property?
75
It's a zoning
people on their
issue.
property having a keg party, that should apply to every residence in town, not just 17 of them because they choose to do it on a one-night basis. If that's the issue we're trying to solve as a board, then it needs to be solved for all 9,500 residents. Because otherwise, you're not solving the darn problem.
Maria?
Sure. So what might help with a little bit of just clarity in terms of the complaints we've been receiving, it's, less so the, not exclusively, but less so the owner-occupied units or the folks who might just be doing this on rare occasion. But we do, for example, have some instances where people are now purchasing homes as investment properties and specifically using them for this purpose. So they do not live at the property, but they are purchasing these properties, and then 365 days a year, they're being rented out. So those neighborhoods are feeling impacted that they now have this constant flow of a transient population, every day, every week of the year now. And sort of the quality of life impact that has to their neighborhood with people, coming and going at different times of the day, not knowing who your neighbors are. And so I would say that those particular rentals have been more so problematic, and I would say are the rentals that we've been receiving more complaints about. Not exclusively, but more so.
Can we see those complaints? I mean, people driving down your street that you don't know, is that something we're going to regulate? I mean, people drive down my street every day, I don't know.
But Sean, we already acknowledge if a business is in an inappropriate place.
Chris, I agree with you. I'm not fighting with you on the zoning issue. I'm fighting with you on somebody doesn't like that somebody they don't know drives down the street. Again, you're not solving the problem. People that you don't know still drive down your street every day.
We should be having a conversation, right? Because this is something that we never would have foresaw 10 years ago, right? So
Agree.
Our town, the fabric of our town and the use of our town is going to continue to evolve, just as like our society is. So having the conversation, we're not being, I don't think we're going to become overly zealous in our governance of people's lives, but we have to a certain extent, because these are the things that are going to be coming before us as our society and the way people use our society change. And I think people would respect in this community us putting thoughts around either zoning or noise or whichever it is to restrict transient rentals of home that does change the dynamics of people's safety, I think.
If it does, fine. If there's a perception that it does, no. I want to know if it does. And again, I want to know actual police complaints, actual violations of safety. There's a perception that you don't like who drives down your street, but again, the same is true, you could say, of apartments or of houses or of...
But those are zoned as they should be, and that's the understanding of living there and living near it.
Again, all I'm saying is solve the problem, Chris.
But I do want to point out, theoretically and legally speaking, you live in a neighborhood that has 500 cars that go through every day, and someone is promoting and selling cupcakes out of their house, and one car comes to buy cupcakes, people in that neighborhood have the right to say, that's not an appropriate person to be driving in this street. It's a business that's operating out of that home. It's not consistent with our ordinances or our
We don't have the
zoning.
right to regulate who drives down streets, Chris.
I'm just,
That's-
you're
But we do have the right to
contesting
regulate
that until
businesses.
something reaches a critical threshold,
Yeah.
that people can't ask for it to be
Yeah, we have
regulated.
to
But the
evolve.
reality is, the minute someone puts a house in a neighborhood, regardless of the impact, it's not consistent with how that area is zoned.
There's a daycare in my neighborhood. There's people that do business 3 doors down.
And if no one cares, that's fine, Sean, but if someone stands up
It's
and
not a
says
matter of
that's
caring.
inappropriate, I
Well,
don't
but
want it, then they have a right.
In-home daycares are licensed facilities.
Yeah, and they have a certificate
Those
for it.
are-
Still people I don't know driving down my street every day.
That's true,
But
but
they're
I think what
rental,
we're
right?
talking about is licensing a rental, not who drives down the street.
Again, much like my water ordinance issue. If we're gonna start passing ordinances and regulating people's property, we need to make sure that we're really thinking about doing this.
We do regulate people's
Well,
property. It's
so
called zoning.
Let me
That's
ask you a question.
We're not the zoning commission.
I
let
know,
me ask you a
well, that
question.
was my next point, is that we have to put this back in zoning first.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
And-
They've got this next Monday.
Yes, this, because that's really what it's all going to run back to.
okay, thank you then.
So
I totally agree with doing this with a balanced perspective. As I've said, I do not want to regulate Airbnbs. But if they begin to operate what I'm challenging is the statement that we don't have an obligation to look at regulating what has in essence become a business purpose in residential areas. We do. And so I'm just asserting that we have that obligation. I agree with everything you're saying in the context of doing it the right way and doing it in a balanced way.
I disagree that we do. Government at some level does. We don't regulate daycares at this level. We don't regulate a lot of businesses at this level. The state takes care of it. There's other
That's
places
true.
that take care of it.
The state does that.
I'm not suggesting the government pass the somebody somewhere in government, but if we have 169 versions of this, what a disaster.
Yeah, but don't you think, though, Sean, don't you think
Where
that?
a daycare can go.
So I just want to bring this back. I think this is an awesome philosophical conversation, but right now it really is just philosophical because it's up to the zoning commission now to determine if this is something they want to tackle or if they want to possibly move this to us as an ordinance. So this could come up at our August meeting, depending on what happens next Monday. And the last thing I just want to say is I think the vast majority of our 17 properties, I don't think we've gotten complaints about, and I think that they are responsible. And this is not, at least from me, an attack on Airbnb or people using the service.
I agree. Just get ready. You're about to fire out 17 letters to people that probably have the means to hire counsel, so.
And I think we need to be very careful. The issue in listening to everybody is really not the people driving down the street. It's the person in the house that's selling the cupcakes. That's the illegal act that zoning can prohibit or regulate. And I do think we need to be very careful how we handle this and be equitable. You know, there are exceptions on every street, in every neighborhood. I am personally not a big fan of noise ordinances because it is nearly impossible to regulate. And as a business owner, there are reasons that some of my trucks are out very early in the morning to get in and out of the schools before the kids get there. And you got to be very careful and really think through the ramifications of things. If you have a noise ordinance, somebody could be a smart aleck about it and only have winter parties when everybody's inside. So,
I'm not suggesting we have a noise ordinance, don't worry.
no,
Yeah,
I'm just,
Noise ordinances.
I've been listening to a lot of stuff, and but I think it's a very good discussion, too, that we all bring to the table.
Aren't you glad you came today?
Any other?
Am I
any
still
other-
standing there?
20 minutes ago, if I was you. You already got the appointment.
Tried Melissa moved her table over, you can't get out.
I feel like a box in.
Any other questions for Mike? All right, thank you,
Thank you, Mike.
everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Any other items under communication that anybody wanted to bring up for discussion?
I was going to bring up some other ones, but I'll leave it alone for you.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Oh, so we're not having any executive session at all?
No.
But if we could still.
We are discussing this item.
You do?
Yeah.
The other one's executive session, we're in a meeting.
Oh, all right. Melissa, did you have any luck?